Today, I just want to briefly discuss a recent BBC article, which has understandably made some people a little nervous about supplements. That's not a bad thing in itself, as we should always ask questions when it comes to taking anything outside our body, any exogenous compounds, if you like, whether it be a medicine or a supplement. But we should also be cautious about exaggerated claims too, of which there are far too many such claims being made, especially from unregulated products from outside the UK. We should certainly be wary of products sold online with poor and exaggerated claims, illegal labeling, dubious provenance, or promises that sound just too good to be true. But there is an important distinction to be made here before rushing too rapidly to making any judgment. There's a world of difference between taking a random cocktail of pills because the internet says they're fashionable, using well-formulated supplements made to the UK quality standard GMP to help fill genuine nutritional gaps, of which there are quite a few. The first approach can be very wasteful, of course, and occasionally a little risky, while the second can be a sensible, evidence-based part of looking after your long-term health. At Prime 50, this is where we begin, not with hype, not with dubious miracle claims, but with nutritional reality, and grounded in evidence-based science and total product safety, of course. What I want people to understand is the reality that most people in the UK are not getting enough of several really important nutrients from their diet alone. Though this may sound a little controversial, this statement is based on real data from government surveys run over many years by nutritional scientists. The National Diet and Nutrition Survey, the NDNS, the UK's key government-backed survey of what we eat and the nutrients we actually consume, continues to show worrying shortfalls. We know from countless dietary intake studies from over the last 15 years that vitamin D deficiency remains very common indeed, particularly in winter and especially in older adults too. In fact, around 99% of people are failing to consume the recommended target intake of vitamin D from food alone, though some of the vitamin D, of course, will be made when we venture into the sunshine. Fibre intake is also very poor across almost the whole adult population, with around 97% of us not even achieving the 30-gram daily target. There are also concerns around some essential micronutrients such as folate, iodine, magnesium, iron, selenium, calcium, and other nutrients. Nearly 90% of the population are failing to consume the target intake for magnesium, for example. Over 80% of us are not getting enough zinc from our diet either. This is not because people are careless, it's because modern diets, processed foods, lifestyles, reduced sun exposure, aging, appetite changes, and food choices often make it difficult to achieve optimal intake every day. Of course, if we all had the perfect diet every day, perhaps we could achieve close to what theory tells us we can achieve. But having analysed the data over the last 15 years, the real practical truth is that we are failing to consume the recommended target on 9 important vitamins and minerals. And this is what I mean by filling real nutrient gaps. Of course, a supplement should not be used as an excuse for a poor diet. Food clearly must be our first option, always. A good diet provides protein, healthy fats, fiber, vitamins, minerals, polyphenols, and thousands of other bioactive compounds that work together in ways no tablet can fully replicate. But food first does not mean food only. Sometimes, even with a reasonably good diet, a targeted supplement can be helpful, as shown in the National Diet and Nutrition Survey data. Vitamin D is the standout example, as we just cited. In the UK, for example, from autumn through winter, the sun is just not strong enough for most of us to make adequate vitamin D in the skin. The NHS advises that everyone should consider taking a daily supplement containing around 10 micrograms of vitamin D during autumn and winter. That is not supplement industry hype, that is public health advice. The issue is not whether vitamin D matters. It clearly does. The issue is dose, its quality and appropriateness. A modest daily intake is very different from taking extremely high dose products without medical supervision. Balance is key here as well, and more is not always better. In fact, overdosing can sometimes produce more harm than good, but this applied to most things in life. With fat-soluble vitamins, such as vitamins A, D, E, and K, excessive intakes can cause harm because these nutrients can accumulate in the body over time. That's why responsible formulation really matters. The same principle applies to minerals. Magnesium, zinc, iron, selenium, iodine, they're absolutely essential. But if supplemented, they do need to be used intelligently. Too little may compromise our health, but too much can also disturb normal biology. And this is why I prefer the phrase nutritional support rather than megadosing. The aim is to restore balance, not to overwhelm the body with a single overdosed vitamin. With meds, for example, we all know to stick to the recommended dose on the box, so supplements should not be any different. For people over 50, this becomes even more important. Aging, unfortunately, it changes our physiology in many ways. We typically absorb nutrients less effectively as we age. We also make vitamin D from sunlight much slower than when we were in our 20s, for example. We can't absorb vitamin B12 particularly well due to lower levels of stomach acid. Perhaps that's one reason why there were over 5 million prescriptions for vitamin B12 in 2025. Yes, you're hearing that, 5 million. Appetite can also decline with age, leading to lower micronutrient intakes. So in effect, closing the micronutrient gaps, which are real, preferably with a product containing a range of micronutrients, can be a safe and sensible way to avoid insufficient intakes of these really important nutrients. Bone health, immune function, cognition, vision, cardiovascular health, they all become really important to look after as we get that bit older. In fact, all of these health areas can be supported with sensible gap closing, supplementation. Good nutrition is one of the most important levers we can pull that influence our overall health span. The number of years we live in good health, that is. So why should we avoid this sensible strategy? Muscle mass also, it tends to decline as we age, a process known as sarcopenia. In fact, we lose around 1 to 3% of muscle every year after the age of 45, meaning that a quarter of our muscle mass may have been lost by the time we're 65. And 65 is not old. Not only is muscle lost, but strength too, leading to poor balance and a higher risk of falls. Falling can be just a bit of a laugh when we were 25, but in the over 70s, falling is one of the biggest killers. Interestingly, less muscle mass also means that our body's ability to remove sugar from our bloodstream is also less effective, thereby increasing the risk of type 2 diabetes later in life. So muscle is not just for bodybuilders or gym bunnies. It's actually a fundamental protection against chronic disease as well. That brings us to another headline topic, and that is protein. Protein, it continues to be a fashionable nutrient perhaps, and like all trends, it has attracted both useful discussion, but also marketing excess as well. But the basic science surrounding the importance of protein is actually very sound. Protein is essential for maintaining muscle, for supporting immune function, repairing our tissues, and producing enzymes and hormones. In later life, protein becomes really important because of anabolic resistance, that is the tendency of older muscle to respond less effectively to smaller protein doses. This does not mean everyone needs to live on protein shakes, though there's nothing wrong with a well-formulated shake. It does mean that many adults, particularly older adults, will benefit from thinking more deliberately about protein at each meal. For some, food may be enough, but for others, a good quality protein supplement can be a convenient way to close the protein gap, which is quite real in older adults. The latest science tells us that on average we need just around 100 grams of protein every day, but this is not a target which is easy to hit. As in food terms, this is around 4 chicken breasts, or if you don't like chicken, 18 eggs. I read time and time again in some magazines and social media that people are eating more than enough protein in their diet. This is a little misleading and clearly not based on the latest consumption data. Being someone who only believes scientific data, then it's clear from many of these nutrition intake studies managed by the NDNS that over 80% of older adults are failing to consume enough protein based on the most recent targets. That is the reality. And that is why protein supplementation makes perfect sense. Now, creatine is another supplement now making a lot of headlines. For years, it was thought of mainly as a sports supplement used by athletes and gym goers. But creatine is really an important nutrient involved in cellular energy metabolism, particularly in tissues with high energy demand, such as muscle and brain. The strongest evidence remains around strength, power, and training adaptation, especially when combined with resistance exercise. Increasingly, though, researchers are now also interested in its possible role in healthy aging. Again, the key is context. Creatine is not a magic powder. It will not build muscle while you sit still. But paired with progressive resistance training, adequate protein, and a good overall diet, creatine may be a useful tool for some people looking to preserve strength and function as they age. A further benefit for creatine now seems to be in the field of cognition, where the most recent studies are now seeing genuine cognitive benefits in older adults with creatine supplementation. So, should people be frightened of supplements? No, definitely not, but they should be thoughtful. We should be frightened, however, of poor quality products, reckless megadoses, false promises, and the idea that natural always means safe. It's also worth adding that though nature is an extraordinary chemist, it is not inherently benevolent. Some of the most poisonous substances known to science are entirely natural, while many synthetic compounds have excellent safety records. Whether a substance is safe depends not only whether it comes from nature or a laboratory, but on its chemical structure, the dose consumed, the route of exposure, and also the quality of the scientific evidence evaluating its risks. In science, natural is not a synonym for safe, and synthetic is not a synonym for dangerous. Hemlock is natural, so is arsenic. Biology does not care whether a molecule came from a plant, a capsule, or a laboratory. What matters is what it does in the body, and at what dose, in which person, and alongside which medications or health conditions. So good supplementation starts with 5 questions. First, is there a real need or plausible gap? Second, is the nutrient or compound supported by good evidence for that purpose? Third, is the dose sensible? Fourth, is the product made to a high quality standard of manufacturing, such as GMP? And fifth, is it appropriate for the individual, taking into account age, diet, medication, and medical history? This is the responsible middle ground, not blind enthusiasm. The BBC article is right to remind us that supplements should not be treated casually, but it would be a mistake to conclude that supplements are therefore unnecessary or in fact dangerous as a category. That would be like saying food is dangerous because some foods are ultra-processed, or medicines are bad because some are misused. The truth is more useful than the headline. Some supplements are unnecessary. Some are poorly formulated. Some are sold at doses that make little nutritional sense. But others can genuinely help people meet real needs, particularly where national data show persistent shortfalls and where aging increases the importance of maintaining muscle, bone, immune health, and metabolic health. For most people, the best approach is simple. Eat as well as you can. Prioritize protein, plants, fiber, healthy fats, and minimally processed foods. Stay active. Do resistance exercise. Get outside. Sleep properly. And then, where diet and lifestyle leave gaps, consider carefully chosen supplements from a trusted source. But supplements should not replace common sense, but used wisely, they can support it. That's the Prime 50 philosophy: evidence before excitement, safety before fashion, and targeted nutritional support for real people living real lives.